Yes, awesome. Right down here up front. See, the best people know that in this talk we give free upgrades to first class, unlike the airplane getting here. So if anybody wants to jump up front, it won't be disruptive, I promise. You'll get a much better view of this bright orange sweater that I'm wearing and be able to hear the rasp in my voice as I overcome my cold that had me down for about a week. I'm excited to see a bunch of people here first thing in the morning, or what passes for first thing in the morning at a hacker conference. It's great that I'm up first and it's 10 a.m. Gave me a nice opportunity to sleep in and get here. How many people, by show of hands, recognize the illusion that's made in the title of the talk? No? Oh, a couple of people. Good. So for those who don't know, see if my clicker works. Yeah. This is a William Gibson quote. He said, "The future is here, it just isn't very evenly distributed." William Gibson, of course, was one of the foundational cyberpunk writers. I think, you know, he's been the term cyberpunk has been attributed to a bunch of people. He is one of them. I don't know who originally came up with it. But when I was putting this talk together, I wanted to do something that was really fun and exciting. And I realized that this totally can be. This is such a fun topic to talk about because I think we can all relate to it. And I think we don't realize the degree to which we actually are living the cyberpunk future, or it's available to those who seek it out. And that is great in some ways. It's also maybe not so good in some other important ways. And I want to talk a little bit about that today. So first, here's what my morning looked like. My term woke me up. I got caffeine in the form of coffee, pre-measured, it was great for my stems. And then my term called a ride to get me to the airport to come here. When I was getting on the plane, I put my phones into blocking mode so that it would knock out all the distractions. Nobody could talk to me, you know, that annoying seatmate that always wants to like banter about work and sell you something. I checked my crypto credits when I was on the plane or waiting to board the plane. They were down, kind of sucks. Oh well, I guess I'll have to work and get some more. Then I jacked in to the net, got some videos, downloaded them, pulled them onto my term, and then hopped on the plane. Luckily, my Vax code passed, and my mask check cleared, so I was able to get here. And now I'm presenting to you on my cyber deck. So this is the cyberpunk future that we actually have, that we're living today, and we're just not looking at it in that way. It's kind of cool to think about 20 or 30 years ago, what we would have thought about the life that we're living today. And not only that, where it's going from here. But I have a confession. This is not actually going to be a talk about security at a security conference. This is going to be a talk about humanity, the human condition, about us as individuals and as a society, and some of the implications of not just security, but the technology decisions, the technology drivers that we're making every single day as we create the cyberpunk future right before our eyes. At 10 o'clock in the morning, heavy stuff. This is going to be a deep talk. You're going to walk away from here with the thought-provoking emoji, but not one of the new ones that just got pushed out. I don't know if anybody downloaded those. Emojis probably drive more security adoption than anything else because Apple and Google always roll the security into the emoji updates. Just FYI, in case you wonder why your emojis are delayed, so that they can get a security update in. This is my about me slide, because anytime somebody's up in front of you, you should always ask, who the heck is this person and why should I pay attention to anything that they say? I've been around, I've done a bunch of stuff. I'm not gonna belabor it, but I've been doing security for 20 plus years as a professional, and before that, many, many years as an amateur, making a lot of mistakes on my own and other people's computers. Fortunately, the statute of limitations has expired on all of those, so I can talk about them. But I do a bunch of stuff. Used to work on computers. Now my favorite hacking tools are PowerPoint, Excel, and Microsoft Word, because it turns out if you can get root in the C-suite, then all the other layers will take care of themselves. I run a small consulting firm and have for about the last decade, and recently The last 5 or 6 years, I've gotten much more into trying to hack public policy, so we have better laws and better protections for everyone, as well as avoiding making dumb laws, which is part of the problem as well. Anybody recognize this? It's been a couple of years since this was front page news. This is the Blue Origin shuttle. I think this was the Jeff Bezos one, where he's like, I'm going to go into space. I'm going to be the first space tourist. And like Richard Branson beat him to it. And Elon Musk famously said, yeah, I'm going to die in space. I sent my car up there to like drive around in orbit, or I don't know what he's doing with that thing. But a lot of people look at this and they see, oh, this is just a bunch of billionaires boosting their egos, trying to be the first, trying to prove that they're cooler than all the other kids on the playground. And it is that. But I look at this and I see so much more than that. I see promise for humanity. I see first movers that are going to radically transform things. Famously, people ask, like, is it better to be a king in the 1800s or a peasant today? And people can say, well, today peasants have things that the kings in the 1800s could not even conceive of, right? We've got all of these cool technologies. And that's true. It's also true that peasants get treated like dirt. And those are the types of technology choices that I think we need to be considering. I look back on this 1961 speech that JFK gave. If you're not familiar with it, it's really, really inspiring. It inspired a generation of physicists, of engineers, of mathematicians, of cyberpunk writers, right? If you grew up in the 60s, 70s, you watched the future. You watched all the sci-fi that you were reading about come to life right before your eyes. It must have been absolutely astounding to watch these things happen in real time. We had to take the physics that we knew to the very limit. We had to build new engineering practices around this. We had to innovate new manufacturing. We got Tang from the space program. And who didn't grow up with Tang? We got all these amazing new things, these amazing new technologies. And we did it not so a single person could go and do something, but as they say, for all mankind, to push humanity forward. And it's said that when some of the first people were kind of traversing the world back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and running into these tribes and cultures that have been cut off for tens of years, or that had opted out of more technologically advanced society, they would ask, hey, I heard we went to the moon in the 1960s. What have we done since then? It's like, oh man, I don't know. That's a good question. Soon we're going to be doing asteroid mining. There's already trials of this. And it's kind of incredible to think about. One of the fundamental, I think, sci-fi concepts is this idea of the Kardashev scale of energy use. You can measure a civilization's advancement by what proportion of their planet, their solar system, and their galaxy they're able to take advantage of. And this is kind of cool. At level 1, you're basically harvesting everything that the planet has to give you. At level 2, you're going and getting bigger. There's a concept of something called a Dyson sphere, where you build an energy capture unit around the star that you orbit and siphon all the energy out of it. And then there's also a concept of basically harnessing the energy of a black hole at the center of a galaxy, which is absolutely amazing. And so if we're going to get to those things, we have to do some of this stuff. We have to do asteroid mining. We have to be able to utilize efficiently all the energy that our planet can give us. And so if anybody is going to be in here for Sitcode's talk after mine, he's talking about harnessing the energy of the solar system, of our sun, of our star, which is one step on the pathway to getting to these incredibly advanced technological achievements. One of the things that always really fascinated me about cyberpunk is this ability to like travel through space, the low Earth orbit kind of thing, hypersonic travel, where you hop on a plane in New York and you wake up, or you step off in Tokyo and it's like 4 hours later. That's astounding, it's mind-boggling. And partly it's a literature trope, because you have to get people from one place to another physically in a book really quickly. But partly it's possible. This is a commercializable vehicle that's being built out by the European Union right now, where it's going to take 100 passengers, a couple hundred passengers, on a hypersonic flight, a couple hours to get to London. That seems cool. You could pop over and pop back for tea in the same amount of time it would take you to get down to Chicago through traffic. That's astounding to me. And if we go back and think about what it was like to travel just by air earlier on in the century, the last century, in 1941, going Boston to Los Angeles, transcontinental, was grueling. I don't know that there's anybody here that would want to pay $4,500 to spend 15 hours on a plane in stale air, and they allowed smoking on the planes back then. It must have been awful. I can't imagine enjoying doing that, wanting to do that. Whereas today, like 6 hours, 70 years later, 6 hours, it's nonstop, $450. So the cost dropped by an order of magnitude. The amount of time was cut in a third, and it's much nicer and more convenient, even if you're in cattle class and you're squished into a middle row seat. It's only for 6 hours in comparison to 15 hours that it used to be. And this is the kind of capability that comes as these things develop. So again, spaceships, absolutely amazing. Space tourism, that concept. And right now, it's just a bunch of rich people doing it to show off to their friends. But very, very soon, within a lifetime, it's going to be a tenth the cost or less. It's going to be much faster, much more convenient, much safer, and all of the things that this kind of advancement gives us. Augmented reality is a reality. So I remember reading like Snow Crash and a lot of these other classic cyberpunk books, and it always I was floored. I was like, oh man, I wish I could run around in this cyberspace and go to these virtual stores and hang out in virtual parks and talk to people that are around the world. And it's becoming a reality. This is a video about the Apple version that's coming out, potentially to be announced in June. We will see. But there's a lot of technology already on the market for this, and has been for a while. But it's getting so good that it's practical to have one. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, somebody did a virtual conference. It was super cool. You put your VR headset on, you were bouncing around, jumping up and down, and going to the rafters to watch talks. It was really, really, really wild, and it was a fun experience. That was something super different, but that we're gradually getting more and more accustomed to. Anybody in here have a VR deck? Yeah, a bunch of hands, actually. That's cool. I'm excited about this. And I've spent a lot of my time working in healthcare. One of my first jobs in security was in healthcare. And so I'm really, really passionate about it. And I look around right now, and I see so many things happening in healthcare. It's absolutely amazing. It's astounding. Some of the breakthroughs, some of the revolutions that we're seeing. And I'll go through a few of these that are give me a lot of hope. There are things that were in Cyberpunk that I'll bet even the writers thought oh, this is a couple of 100 years out. And here we are a couple of decades on, and we're doing these things. So you can regrow tissue in a lab. There's something called a bioreactor. And Dean Kamen, who famously came up with the Segway that wasn't so awesome, but also a lot of people don't realize this, he came up with the first insulin pumps as well. He's now testing how to grow tissues in bioreactors, how to grow new parts of your body. So for people who may have lost an ear or may have some other type of condition and want to change that, they can do it. Very soon you'll be able to use your own genes regrow a part of your body or grow a part of your body that will replace what you've lost or will augment it potentially. You know, if you want to have Vulcan ears or elf ears, like we're not super far off from being able to do that in a way that's not just plastic surgery, that's actually your own tissues. It's kind of wild. This is a video from several years ago. This is an autonomous surgical robot. This robot is, if you watch the full video, it actually takes a grape. That's what's being cut open there. It slices off its skin really delicately and carefully, peels it back, and then sutures it back on. This is amazing. Think about what this will mean for people who may not have great access to healthcare. If they're able to get to one of these much less expensive surgical robots, then they can have life-saving procedures done without being proximal to one of the world's best surgeons. It also means that scarring will go down. You know, if you have some type of a traumatic incident, you can reduce the scarring that you have. Like these types of procedures, they're really just ripped from cyberpunk, ripped from sci-fi, and it's super cool to see. Well, I don't want to ask people what if they've got lactose intolerance. Fortunately, I don't, but there's a lot of people who do, and there's a new way to do gene therapy. It's been around for, I don't know, 20 or 30 years in theory, but some of the biohackers out there are turning this into practice. They're creating kits and instructions so that you can basically insert the genetic material for making the proteins that you need, and the thing that helps you digest lactose is a protein. Put it into viruses that will infect your cells with this, and then you put it into a pill and you swallow the pill. And so this, if you go check out this video, it's a guy who did this a couple of years before. He made this pill, swallowed it, and essentially the viruses attacked his stomach lining and injected the encoding for this specific protein. And so for 2 years, he's been able to eat ice cream. He's been able to eat cheese, been able to eat yogurt, to drink milk. And it's absolutely amazing if you think about what this could mean for other conditions, for diabetes, for anything where we have something going on in our genes that we're not making a protein, or we're making too much of a protein, or the wrong kind of a protein. And he's just like doing this in his garage for $100. That's astounding to me. I just can't believe it. Any home brewers here? Brew your own beer? Nice. I would expect no less in Milwaukee. Well, brewing beer is cool. It's a bacteria. You put a bacteria into a sugar solution, and it makes something that humans find useful. It transforms that sugar into a different substance, into something that we find useful. We find it debilitating sometimes as well, but we find it generally useful. What if you could do that with anything else that you've got? So instead of, if you didn't want to change your genes, if you wanted to do something slightly different and just make the thing that you need, what about insulin? Now, for those of you who don't know the history of insulin and the history of diabetes, if you go back 100 years, diabetes was a fatal disease. Kids would get it, and the only way to treat it is a calorie-restricted diet. And so there's stories about these wards of kids that are just emaciated, and like if they eat too much, they're going to die, and if they don't eat enough, they're going to die. So like, what's the treatment there? And the story is Eli Lilly, the chemist, figured out a way to synthesize insulin. And so he went around to one of these wards where all the kids are just in there, and they're emaciated, and there's basically not much hope for them. And he started treating them with insulin, just going in and giving each of them a shot of this synthetic insulin product that he had made and tested. And by the time he got to the last kid in the ward, the first one was up and walking around and like excited. And then eventually all of them. So this is how that type of technology can absolutely be transformative. And you can now make this in your home. You can get a kit and turn it into insulin, especially at a time when things like commercially available insulin here in the US is prohibitively expensive for some people, where EpiPens, which can save your life if you're having an anaphylactic shock response, can now be made for $30 instead of $300 with something called the EpiPencil. This is all just fascinating democratization of science, to be able to take something that 100 years ago was like literally the breakthrough scientific revolution of its era, and now like we can just do it if we want to on a weekend. Like, that's amazing. But in addition to this bright future, the one that we all dream about having, our dystopian cyberpunk future is also here. And this is the part that really scares me. This is the part that has the security implications that I want you to think about, but also has the broader implications, the human security, the human safety, the ability to transform our society in harmful ways, in the parts of the cyberpunk novels that we hate, that the protagonist always rebels against and is trying to stop. We also have those today. So like I mentioned, we've got many concurrent revolutions in healthcare. These depend on a few things. They depend on artificial intelligence. They depend on data storage. They depend on software code. They depend on connectivity. And this conference is all about how we can undermine those things, how it's relatively simple to undermine those things, about how we can't necessarily trust the code that goes into our cars, into our bodies if we have an implanted device, into our airplanes that fly us, how being connected to the internet exposes us to 7 billion people, statistically some percentage of which are sociopaths, and we don't have a good way to build the security in to where it can assure that safety, that reliability, that trustworthiness. So let me give you a couple of examples, and I'll stick to healthcare for right now. Brain implants are absolutely amazing. They can help treat epilepsy, PTSD, depression, arthritis. There's a number of things that these deep brain stimulators can help treat. But they can also modify your brain the way it works. And in talking with a physician, he told me that he was having a problem with a kid who was not responding or would show like evidence of the implant going crazy at certain times. And after working with him for months, he figured out that the kid had learned how to adapt it to get himself high. So now the thing that you put in your body for correcting, as a therapy for something that you have a problem with, it's causing you harm in your life, is now being used for elective reasons as well, just to like, I don't know, have fun because you're bored on a Saturday. Wouldn't be the way I would go and get that kick, but that's the kind of thing that we're going to be dealing with really, really soon, that we're already seeing evidence of and already dealing with. I've got another friend who's a physician in London, and a patient came in with what appeared to be symptoms of an underlying condition for which they had an implant given to them. And, you know, their best guess was, despite all the treatment they had given this patient, the disease was just overtaking them too fast. But this physician was like, you know, I wonder if there's something going on with that brain stimulator. So she reset it, and all the problems went away. Turns out the brain stimulator was doing something funky that was replicating the type of condition that this patient had, the underlying condition. And so it was indistinguishable from, the physiology was indistinguishable from the problem with the medical device. And so that started her wondering, was this a hack? Did somebody hack that? Was it unintended? Did something happen? Was it like the batteries are just getting low? So this is starting to raise a lot of questions in physicians' minds around the world. This is an actress. She was in Hunger Games, and in Hunger Games, she plays an archer. She's actually an archer in real life, which is really cool because she has a prosthetic limb. She was born with a condition where part of her arm just wasn't there. And so she's got this cool prosthetic. Recently, she was traveling and she had an issue with it. It died, the battery died, and she couldn't get to a USB port to charge it. So she's in an airport looking for a plug to charge her arm so it would keep working. Like, that's kind of weird for me to think about. For her, that's her everyday reality. And it's connected to Bluetooth. So she can go in and with Bluetooth and see the status. What's the battery look like? Are there any potential issues coming up with it? Do I need to take it in for service? I said, that's really cool. Are you afraid that people are going to hack it? She's like, oh yeah, that would be catastrophic. I would hate it. Like, I think about that all the time, and it really scares me. I said, well, you should come out to DEF CON, and we'll like help you figure stuff out. She said, oh no, I would never go to DEF CON. Like, there's places I just can't go because I can't trust the environment. And if this thing started just flailing around, it could hurt me, it could hurt someone, it could damage the thing. I said, well, what happens if it gets broken? It's like, oh, it's actually really not an easy process. Even if it's something simple, I can't fix it myself. I have to send it to the manufacturer. I can't look at the software code that's in it. I can't update that. You know, I can't go to like the equivalent of a digital gym. Like, well, but that means you feel like you don't own a part of your body. Isn't that weird? You're like licensing your body? She's like, yeah, it's a really weird thing. And so a couple of years ago, a lawyer named Andrea Matwishin wrote a legal paper, very well researched, very well cited. It's really, really thick. If you are a lawyer, I encourage you to go check it out. If you're not, it might be a little bit dense. It's too dense for me. But she called it the Internet of Bodies. You know, what happens when we all become connected to the internet? And these are the types of things we need to start thinking about now, not just for the legal frameworks. You know, is it legal for someone to license part of my body to me rather than me owning it? But also the societal, ethical things that we need to start thinking about, how we treat these technologies that keep us alive. She also wrote a Wall Street Journal piece, which is a lot easier to digest. So if you're interested in that, go check it out. And then this was cool. This is a woman named Poppy Crumb, and she gave a talk called The End of the Poker Face. Lady Gaga was all the rage, and so it was a really good talk title. And the idea was, through just observing the chemistry of your breath, the levels of CO2 you have in your exhales, the thermal sensors or the thermal patterns on your face and in your body, through your breathing rate, through your heart rate, through these things that are observable across a room, you can tell when someone's lying. So she asked the question, what happens if you can no longer lie to anybody else? What does that do to us as people? Like, this is such a weird concept. We lie a lot. We don't realize that we're lying, but we lie a lot, every single day. Little ones, you know, they don't matter much. Things like, how are you doing? Oh, I'm great. You're not great. There's something going on in your life that you just don't want to talk about. The lies make it easier for us. So what happens when we can no longer tell those? Because somebody can say, like, I know you're not great. And there's other types of lies that are much, much bigger. I live in Washington, D.C. That joke has its own punchline. I tell you, the thing that worries me, though, is what happens if we can no longer lie to ourselves? If we can no longer convince ourselves, yeah, I'm doing great, I'm fine. If we have to address these things, if we have to confront them, that, I think, is going to be the thing that really changes us on an individual as well as societal level and Maybe this technology never gets widely adopted because it creeps too many people out. But it's here. Like, it is here today, literally. There's a famous study where just by listening to someone talk, an artificial intelligence has like an 80% accuracy rate of diagnosing someone with getting Parkinson's in their future. That's wild. I don't know that I would even want to know that, but somebody's going to know it. How are they going to use that? What if it's your insurance company? They drop you. You no longer have insurance. What if it's your employer? They say, yeah, we don't really want this person around. They're not going to be productive when they're in their 40s and 50s. So we're not going to invest in them anymore after a certain age. These are the types of things that we really have to start thinking about and dealing with. This is the dystopian part of the cyberpunk future that we're already living in. And the consequences of failure here are really, really high. Raise your hand if you think that we've got it figured out how to do security for a single computer or for a small network of computers that are running, well-understood operating systems and well-understood paradigms. Raise your hand if you think that. Oh, one hand, a brave person. I won't put you on the spot and ask you when it's relatively simple and we can't get it right, what happens when we make it exponentially more complex? We've got to start doing better now. We've got to start working harder now. I know a lot of the people in this room have already been doing that for years or even decades. But we've got to be more successful at it. We've got to try different things if we want to see different outcomes. We've got to do things like influence public policy, like go and build stuff instead of just breaking stuff. We've got to change it up so that our future can be the future that we want to see. You know this person, but you don't know that you know them. Seamus O'Penn, born in Cork, Ireland, 1978. He's got a degree in mathematics from Trinity College, Dublin, PhD in AI from MIT in Boston. You may not know him, but you've probably heard of the company that he created. It's called OpenAI. Anybody heard of OpenAI? Okay, kind of a funny joke. But I dropped in to ChatGPT a statement, generate a biography for Seamus O'Penn, an AI creator. And it came back with this thing that was very heavily kind of skewed towards somebody who was born in Ireland, grew up in Ireland. Now, I didn't tell ChatGPT that this was an Irish person. I didn't tell ChatGPT that this was a man. I didn't tell ChatGPT any of these things. It's only queuing off of the name Seamus O'Penn. Now, this is kind of a funny bias in AI, but it's still a bias, right? The artificial intelligence told me something based on some kind of a heuristic and a best guess, a probability, and it looks really plausible. Like, you can read through the bio and think, yep, that matches all of the things that I would expect from somebody named Seamus O'Penn. But what happens when it's not so funny? When things that come out of artificial intelligence can absolutely change the way that we think about policing, for instance. The amount of assurance or guarantee that we put that that person is who they say they are. That these things are used in decision-making for hiring, for loans, for where you're able to live, for any of these other things. And I just did a very, very quick search on AI bias, and this is one of the first articles that came up that said bias for light-skinned males is 0.8. Bias for dark-skinned females is 34.7. I don't know what those numbers signify, but I know that that's a huge difference, right? Why? Because AI is being trained on old white dudes like me. Like, is that the world we want of the future? Just a bunch of old white dudes? I hope not. I don't want it. That would be really boring for me and for everybody. But it's these types of willful ignorance or unconscious steps that we may take that limit things like AI to create a future based on what we program it to do, even unintentionally, or just by neglect. And I'll go back to our three old white dudes here. They're pioneering in space. And like I said, right now it's for them. But eventually it will be for the people who are the beneficiaries of this downstream work. If we're systemically disenfranchising people who don't look like them, then we're going to get a world in which it's just inevitable that it's going to be favoring and advantaging people like them. Sheryl Sandberg, I think she's COO of Facebook, said, hey, if you're offered a seat on a rocket ship, you don't ask what seat, you just get on. And like, that's true to some degree, right? I mean, again, going back to the peasant of today versus the regent of the 1800s, like, hey, there's amazing healthcare available. You're gonna take advantage of it because it's so much better than what you can get or what you could get before. But what if this is the seat that you've got on the rocket? You're like shoveling coal into the burners to, I imagine that some of these rocket ships probably don't use coal, but there's an equivalent of it. What's the equivalent of shoveling coal on Facebook? I don't know. Being weaponized against democracy? Like, that seems like a bad trade-off. Like, I don't want to be on that ship. I don't want to have that seat on that ship. But as society, with things like Facebook, with things like algorithms dictating what we view on these platforms, how we consume our news, how we see the world around us, increasingly, we're all on this rocket ship, whether we want to be or not. It's not a matter of what seat you have or what seat you choose. It's a matter of where you get put. And right now, most of us are being put into this coal shoveling seat. We're driving the engines that run it for the benefit of others. Gil ScottHeron has an absolutely amazing spoken word, beat poetry speech from the 1970, I think. It was just after we had landed on the moon. And he's talking about how he walks down the street in his neighborhood and he sees people addicted to drugs. They can't get medical care. He sees parents who can't afford to house themselves and their kids. He's like, there are people on the moon right now, and I can't figure out how to get basic necessities. I'm at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. I'm much worse off than like a hunter-gatherer, and there's people walking on the moon. The amount of inequity here is just absolutely insane. And he's right, and this is what this looks like today. This is what our dystopia looks like. We've got to change that. We've got to be better. So how do we evenly distribute the cyberpunk future, and how do we make it one that we want to see? Well, we're going to go back to ancient Greece. We're going to forget all this modern technology. We're going to go back to the time of, the wheel was a brand new invention. Western civilization was starting. We were coming up with the ideas for democracy. Everybody was putting their rock inside the bucket of the person that they wanted to vote for. It's a really exciting time in life. Anybody here speak ancient Greek? I don't. What's it say?
I can pronounce it, but I don't know what that word is.
Pronounce it. Say again? Kubernetes. If it doesn't say Kubernetes, it's supposed to. I may have fat-fingered the... Okay. So yeah, this is Kubernetes, which is the basics for the word cybernetics. Cybernetics was coined in, I believe, the 1940s by Dr. Norbert Wiener. And it was meant to be the man-machine system. Kubernetes means the person at the wheel on the boat and the boat itself. It is the integration, the synthesis of technology and humanity. This has been built into our profession since the outset. But how many people today think about cybersecurity as people and technology versus just technology? And I don't need a show of hands in the room. But in our day-to-day interactions, probably most of the people that we talk to think, oh, cyber, that means computer, and it's over there in the closet. So just, you'll be over there, and we'll be out here doing the other things in the organization. And it's also the root of the word governance, which is political systems. It's the public policies that we make. It's the way that we decide as a society what we want to favor, what we want to avoid. We're all wrapped up in that, and we didn't even know it. So I want us to get back to that. I want us to remember the roots of where we came from, to remember that we are part of something much broader, to remember that we have the power to decide where we go on this ship. We can plot our course. And I want to make sure that we steer towards the future we want versus letting the winds just laissez-faire, blow where they will. And I want to try and inspire you over the next couple of minutes to build, not just to break things, to become a part of creating something, and then instill in that the values that you want to see in your cyberpunk future, to make it available for everyone, to ease the access, to ensure its security, its safety, its reliability, to draw on the known physics of software, of networking, of cybersecurity, to creatively apply that new engineering. Because if we want to do this, we have to get into space. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. We have to get into space. We have to improve healthcare. We have to apply new technologies to healthcare. We can't say, well, we got to wait for it to become safe. Well, there's people dying today. What do you say to those people? Sorry, the security wasn't good enough for my personal standard, therefore you're going to be denied this healthcare. We have to adopt advanced artificial intelligence. We have to figure out a way to make it work. It's not enough to sit on the sidelines and say we shouldn't do it or they should have done it differently or to second guess. We've got to get in there. So when you're thinking about what you're going to do next, whether it's walking out this door after Sick Codes talk, whether it's your next career move, no matter what it is, think about, is this the right challenge? Am I going to the direction, to the place where I really want to be going to drive the future that I want to see? I founded the Aerospace Village at DEF CON, formerly the Aviation Village, and our motto, our mission statement is build, inspire, promote. So for the things that you're doing, does it inspire? And a shameless plug here, we've got the Hack-A-Sat coming up really, really soon. I think some of the qualifications have already started, so go check that out and sign up for it and get involved, because that is really cool. There's satellites in orbit that you'll be hacking, like literally in orbit. That's really cool. How can this scale down? We always talk about scaling things up. How do we, exponentially, like 10x this, 100x this? But can the thing you're doing work for a small business? Can it work for an individual? Can it work for somebody who's not technologically advanced? How do we ensure that this is democratized, that it's evenly distributed? And what does it mean? There are some things that are more important than technology. We are more important than technology. How are you building it for people to make their lives better? Or is it just like a fancy new widget, the new Flappy Birds or whatever? Does it really do something? If you're thinking about this in security context, if you're doing security research, start with what is the problem? How does this impact people? And then find the bugs. Because I guarantee you'll find the bugs. Instead of starting with, let me find a cool bug, and then try and tie it to something that matters. Start on the other side of that. When you're looking at what you're going to do next, how does it serve? Who does it serve? Could be going in and talking with some of the local policymakers or national policymakers, helping them understand the consequences of some of the decisions that they make, helping shape that. And having talked to a bunch of policymakers myself at both the state, local, as well as federal level, like they all want to learn. They all want to get better. If they don't have the time, then their staffers certainly do. That's what they're paid for. And in fact, a lot of them are really, really want to hear from independent security experts, because all they get is the talking points from the Chamber of Commerce or from, the government affairs, government relations person at whatever company happens to be located in their district. Think about healthcare and medicine. Again, for something like what we're talking about here, I personally am really, really the most enthusiastic as well as the most troubled by healthcare. And I think that that's where they need the most help. The 2017 HHS Task Force on Cybersecurity in healthcare across the nation said that 75% of healthcare providers lack a single qualified security professional. How are you going to secure a hospital if you don't have any people who know how to do security to begin with? That's tough. I worked in a hospital. I know how difficult it is, even when you do have talented security people, well-qualified security people. Then what can this build? People do amazing things with platforms when they're given access to them. Who's going to build on top of it? Is this something that can be accessible to non-technical people? Can it be accessible to civil society organizations? Can it be accessible to folks who are going to use it for something you never intended, but that serves a purpose in their community, whatever community that happens to be, whether it's physical, a community of interest, like the hacker community, or whatever. And I think the consequences are if we don't do this, if we don't get it right, then the ship we're piloting will just be torn apart. 1968, Stuart Brandt said, "We are as gods and we might as well get good at it." Now, Stuart Brandt was a famous environmentalist. He helped found the Sierra Club back in the 60s, the Whole Earth Catalog. But he was also at the very first Hackers Conference. And if you've heard the phrase, information wants to be free, that was Stuart Brandt. So he was there at the beginning of the technology revolution and the computer revolution as well. I might change that slightly. We must get good at it. It's not enough to not be good at it. We've got to be able to make the types of decisions we need to make to be a little bit better, to be more deliberate, more thoughtful about the types of technology we're creating. And finally, I want to just remind you that the cavalry isn't coming. We are what it is. It falls to us. You are the cavalry. Every one of us has a role to play in this. You may be a parent, a child, a brother, a sister. You can be a technically literate voice of reason to people who don't necessarily get it. They're not where we are. And with that, I want to thank you all very much. And I think I may have a couple of minutes for questions if anybody has questions. Yes.
You mentioned the guy in his garage doing gene therapy for lactose intolerance. Do you know if there's, they published any of that? Is it on the net?
I'm not sure. So the question was about doing gene therapy on yourself. I don't know if he published it in like academic journals, but it's a YouTube video. Like you can just go and watch the YouTube video. And the one that I pulled that screen still from is the 2-year follow-up where he said, you know, it's starting to wear off because the cells are being replaced now in my stomach lining. But he had a couple of years where he was just totally lactose tolerant. He could digest it. Other questions? All right, I can't see hands, so if you've got a question, shout it out. If you want to brew your own insulin, what legal issues would you have? I am not a lawyer. I'm not pretending to be a lawyer. I don't even play one on TV. I wouldn't even venture a guess. I have some thoughts, but I am so far removed from it. It's probably a weird area of law. There probably are some people who can help you figure it out. But like there's people doing it and putting it out there and they haven't been arrested. So you can take that with as many grains of salt or insulin as you want. Other questions? Just shout. Okay. Oh, yeah. What's the question? So the question was with some type of a deep brain stimulator or a brain implant, could that, instead of give you stimulation, could it read the electrical impulses and send that back to companies to figure out your deepest, darkest secrets? Maybe. Right now, we're not quite there. I saw a paper a couple of weeks ago that said, yes, that's totally a possibility. Like with special equipment and your head is like entombed in a bunch of electrodes and you're given a picture of something, then this can recreate it with some artificial intelligence that's helping doing the mapping. And that's kind of true, but what the paper buried is the fact that they told the artificial intelligence what you were going to be thinking of, and it recreated a picture of it based on some of the patterns. So it's not there yet. Is it possible? Sure. What would it look like when that actually is possible? Would you have to be hooked up in 100 different places? Maybe. Most of the deep brain stimulators have a very specific placement. So they would read a very specific part of your electrical impulses if they can read it. Some of them don't have the capability to, act like the microphone instead of the speaker. Some of them are just speakers. So I think that the kind of bulk collection of worst fears and nightmares is probably not going to happen without some serious hardware around your head. But like maybe we're getting there. I don't know. Who knows? Who's to say what's going to happen in 10 years? Other questions? All right. Not hearing anything? Going once, going twice? Sold. Thank you very much. Stick around for SICK. He's going to come up and talk about hacking a solar system and protecting your solar system. So thank you.